Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to a new Jscrambler webinar. I'm Shanna Moran, Regional Sales Director at Jscrambler, and I will be your host for today's webinar. We are here for Coalfire reviews the Jscrambler platform in meeting PCI DSS requirements for 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. Recently, we at Jscrambler engaged Coalfire Systems, a respected PCI qualified security assessor company, to assess the alignment of its platform with PCI DSS version 4. For this session, we will discuss Coalfire's conclusions with our guest speaker, Michael Burke, Principal Consultant, Payments and Cloud Advisory at Coalfire. Joining me is also my colleague, Jeffrey Cleveland, Pre-Sales Engineer at Jscrambler. A couple of housekeeping rules for today. This webinar will take approximately 60 minutes. You can use the chat window to ask questions and comment during the webinar. We will have a couple of polls throughout our discussions, so be ready to participate, as well as a Q&A in the end. After the webinar, you'll get additional resources on the topic from us. And you will, of course, get a recording of the webinar as well. A little bit about Jscrambler. Jscrambler was founded in 2010, bringing to market our Code Integrity solution, which is a first-party JavaScript polymorphic obfuscation tool. Say that 5 times fast. 4 years ago, we released our Web Page Integrity product. This product houses the Jscrambler PCI compliance solution. At the time our Web Page Integrity solution was released, this solution was already solving for some of the new version 4 standards, meaning compliance is a core competency of Jscrambler. As you can see, Jscrambler's primary focus is on client-side security. For the reasons listed above, and what you will hear from my colleague Jeffrey Cleveland, we believe that Jscrambler is positioned as the market leader to best assist companies worldwide with their PCI version 4 compliance journeys. Here's a little bit of a timeline to explain what is happening with PCI and the vendor selection process. As I mentioned previously, Jscrambler was founded in 2010, and we've been doing this work for a long time. What about you? Have you started evaluating a vendor to support the 2 new requirements? If you could take a moment to submit your vote, the questions are: just now learning about the requirements, haven't started, exploring solutions, already implemented controls. We'll keep this open for a little bit to see where you are in the requirements process. As a reminder, many companies are starting to evaluate platforms as we speak, as the requirements must be in place by the end of March of 2025 or the beginning of April 2025. Couple more seconds to vote. Please make sure your voice is heard so that we can cater the rest of the conversation to where you are. Okay. Keep voting, and we're going to move ahead to the agenda. So for our agenda for the next 60 minutes, we're going to talk about what's new in PCI DSS version 4, real-world risks to online payment pages, overview of PCI DSS version 4 e-skimming requirements, 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, the Coalfire opinion of Jscrambler platform, which will be really interesting, and how Jscrambler meets the requirements, Jscrambler PCI demo by Jeffrey Cleveland, and a Q&A. So it'll be very interactive. Keep the questions coming. Okay, so far this is what we're seeing with the polls. 56% are exploring solutions. That's a pretty significant number. 16% are just learning and 19% haven't started. Props to those who are just learning and haven't gotten started for being aware of this and for being here today to learn. So thank you. One more result to share, 12% have already implemented. It's very exciting. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Michael Burke, PhD, Principal Payment and Cloud Advisory, to introduce himself.
Okay. Shannon, thank you very much. Hopefully you can all hear me. I just got the message that I was kicked out of the webinar. In information technology, specifically focused on business requirements with IT. I come to Coalfire having a long career and holding titles as CIO, CISO, CTO, and Chief Compliance Officer. I've done a lot of things, and I'm really excited about my role here at Coalfire because I'm able to actually give our clients the experiences that I have as well. So let's talk about the implementation guideline. I know that we spoke about this earlier, and our friends at the council have outdated this slide this week with the introduction of 401. So we do have not an April Fool's joke, as I've been saying for the last couple of years, that all of these new requirements go in place on April Fool's Day every year. So here we are in 2024. 321 has been retired, and we're looking at some of these future dated requirements. So for those of you that are just getting started or investigating solutions, you're at the right space right now. You're able to evaluate some things and get them implemented before they're required in 2025. So let's talk about the big ideas. Well, the DSS got updated after nearly a decade, but the main theme that we've come up with in Coalfire is that they've professionalized the DSS. The DSS has grown up. They've expanded some coverage into some supply chain risks, which we know, and there are reasons for those, and we'll get into some of the reasons why things happen. But we're going to specifically talk about e-skimming detection, and for this webinar. But the expanded coverage, virtualized architectures, since there was no focus on cloud previously, and also prescriptive guidance. No longer can we say things like, well, there is no significant change, and we're not going to look at that. Those are actually given a baseline definition. And then control objectives. Some of those things that have been defined for the organizations, and the assessors have been given some specifics to look for. New introduction, really new option for DSS is the targeted risk analysis and the customized approach, which we're not going to get into the customized approach at all here. We just want to move forward. So let's talk a little bit about e-commerce skimming detection. The important piece is why? Why was this so important? And quite honestly, the dollars matter. 2020, Hannah Anderson was fined in a CCPA lawsuit. Now, you might be thinking that what does that have to do with PCI? But it was consumer card details. It took them 2 months. They got 200,000 accounts. So California fined them $400,000. British Airways in 2018 is probably the most notable Mage card attack. And for those that may not be aware, Mage card is e-skimming. It's what we knew e-skimming to be previously. This 183 million pound fine that happened, British Airways actually went back and got that reduced. But still, its initial fine was 183 million. So, how prolific is this? So FICO said that there's a 77% increase in the number of cards that are impacted in 2023, just in the first half of the year. You know, and funny, it's a 77% increase from the year before. So now we have this situation where it's not growing. It's growing linearly, but it's still at 77%. That will become a serious problem going forward. Financial institutions, 3,000 unique institutions had a skimming attack in 2022. We have almost 400% increase in compromised cards, and 200 cards for every skimming attack. So these are pretty serious numbers, and the council took notice of these things. So that's why we end up with some new requirements. So the future projections, what is the industry seeing? The industry is seeing that they're going to target mobile applications. The mobile platforms are a softer target for Mage card groups. They'll start looking at ways of injecting code into those mobile platforms. There's also a shift towards not going after the big fish. They can actually go and start attacking smaller sites, just to get their foot in the door and attack many small sites that may not have implemented solutions such as the Jscrambler solution. And then also we have this whole idea about AI. People are turning to AI to actually do malicious behaviors as well as great things. So we do have to be worried about that. So what has that turned into? Now, I know we all came here to talk about 643 and 1161, but you notice here that there's an additional requirement, and this is the free giveaway that we've included in this webinar, something that you need to be careful of. So let's talk about this, right? The 643, automated integrity verification, stop pages from loading unauthorized scripts. So there's an important piece of this, and there's multiple pieces, and we'll talk about those specifics as we go on. 1161, the change in tamper detection mechanism, basically FIM for scripts. Now we need to say, okay, we're going to validate that these scripts are the scripts that we think they are. And the council has included some, in the guidance, they've included some references to CSP and SRI. But I think that you'll find that the Jscrambler solution actually solves those in a better way than CSP and SRI. And then 12.10.5. 12.10.5 is the incident response portion of that. And stuck inside those requirements is that this change in tamper detection mechanism that we see in 1161 is required to be part of your incident response plan. And that particular mechanism, having a good way of making 1161 report to 12.10.5 is going to be a challenge for organizations to make sure that they're doing that right. And I think that from what I've seen from the Jscrambler solution, I think that this is actually something that's tied up nicely. So here we are, right from the requirements. Okay, payment page scripts are loaded and executed. So let's take these backwards, because this is probably the easiest way to look at this. The inventory of all scripts is maintained with justification. This is the authorization piece that you need to, why is this necessary? And then we look at this first piece. Which is each script is authorized. So we have an inventory, and then we have an authorization, and then we start looking at, is this the actual script? So these are important pieces, and quite honestly, they're not new. They're just we do this for all systems. Every time you implement a new system, you need to make sure this is a piece that's in our inventory. Why do we have it in our inventory? Is this authorized to be on our network? And then we validate that that particular system is configured in the way that it should be. So if we start taking those pieces and we start looking at that, we're just doing the same thing that we do for systems in the JavaScript world. A lot of people. So 643. There's remember that this doesn't say that scripts, that only payment page scripts have to be on that system. It says that all scripts have to be authorized, which is an important distinction when we start looking at that. 11.6.1. So now we start looking at this and saying, how do we validate that these scripts haven't been modified? This is the FIM piece. We may build these corollaries to FIM. Very familiar wording, at least once every 7 days, or at a frequency defined in the targeted risk analysis. So when we start looking at this, right, the targeted risk analysis is something new. And maybe you don't want to do a targeted risk analysis, and you say, well, we're going to do this every 7 days, but it is still every 7 days. You will make sure that you do a targeted risk analysis for this, and having a comprehensive solution will help you to meet these requirements, even without the targeted risk analysis where you have to do specifics of that. When we start talking about the customized approach, it's interesting, because this is where we'll find some language that gives us the intent of the control. As we say, scripts are loaded to pages. A timely prompt from our system that validates this. Anti-skimming must include this alert that happens if something is modified. Now, it's interesting, that's the lead-in for 12.10.5. So for those of you that are here right now, you get some advanced warning that 11.6.1 and 12.10.5 are what I like to call connected controls. These controls they can't operate really independently because they refer to one another. 12.10.5 is referred to in the spirit of the control for 11.6.1. So now we do have this whole thing. This is a future dated control. This will go into effect in 2025 on ironically April Fool's Day. But those are the pieces that we do need to be careful with. So for those of you that are just looking right now, make sure that your solution has the ability to meet 12.10.5 at the same time that it's meeting 11.6.1. And we'll watch the poll here and see how things are going. And we'll just give you some time to take a look at that. And so here's where I will talk at you a little bit. Now, understand that some of this is what the lawyers make us say. So we did find, in my review of the Jscrambler platform, I found it had capabilities to reduce some operational stress, assist you with things like the inventory and the authorization and the ability to maintain your compliance and to report for assessors. I found that there's definitely a way where assessors can come in and they can just look for these reports, and you very quickly get a clean bill of health. The other piece is that it doesn't give you a system that's so unwieldy, where you have to go now look at, okay, well, this alert has to be configured, and this particular script needs to be running on my web server, and my web server needs to report to a logging solution like Splunk, and now I have to go find it, and I have to create custom pieces to alert us. All this is included in the platform. I'm very excited about things where the organization can create business as usual practices, and these solutions can support those without requiring additional workforce, because we all know that finding people is probably the most difficult thing right now. So here's what we did. So Coalfire reviewed the Jscrambler platform for its applicability to 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, and we found, as the lawyers will make me say, that it can be effective. Now, this can be effective. That means that you have to configure it properly, and you do have to participate a little bit, but in the event that it is implemented. And the lawyers make me say this because there's too many organizations that just buy something and say, well, we have this, and Coalfire said that it would work. You do have to have actual configuration on this, and you do have to participate with it. But I will tell you that your participation is smaller than some other solutions that I have looked at. Here's the other thing too. For those of you that are compliance managers, Jscrambler gives you some offerings that might be able to help you in other ways. Multi-layered defense for your first-party code and scripts. So the point is that if you would like to protect those assets, as may be required by other frameworks, the Jscrambler solution gives you that opportunity. Also, there's a number of frameworks, and we'll talk about these pieces. There are at least 4 frameworks that have now disclosure requirements for data breaches, and these may apply to you and may not apply to you, but the point is that they're coming in all of the different frameworks now. Having that intelligence on why those scripts are misbehaving and potentially preventing those scripts from misbehaving because their behavior has changed might be the way that we get a more secure e-commerce environment. All of these frameworks have now moved to have an infinite emphasis on incident response. It's probably the state of the world right now, where we're looking more at how do we detect and prevent, because we know that things are going to happen. So this is the piece that is probably the most exciting piece for me with this, because this is not just a PCI solution. And Shannon, do we want to talk about this poll?
Yes. Can you hear me? No.
I can.
Oh, you can. Okay,
I can hear
perfect. All right. So results of the poll are telling us that cost is a factor, 17%. Advanced security and controls is 31%. And just trying to scroll up here. Ease of use was definitely the winner.
And ease of use is definitely the winner here as well. One of the exciting things is I'm looking at it from the perspective of how do you snap this into your operation. The configuration of meeting those controls, finding your inventory of scripts, and for those that are participating right now, we definitely have an announcement. Well, Jscrambler has an announcement. I don't have an announcement, but I was pretty excited to hear about it. The piece of collecting your inventory and how Jscrambler is going to help all of us collect an inventory. So for the assessors have now a tool just through Jscrambler to actually validate the inventories for 643.
Okay. And we'll pass it over to Jeffrey Cleveland, pre-sales engineer at Jscrambler, to show us the platform.
And I think Michael and I are going to kind of pass back and forth here a little bit.
Perfect.
We'll jump over
We are, yeah,
to the demo, and then, yeah, I was going to say I'll get you started on your first slide here, but I'm going to go ahead and load the demo environment and let you talk about the kind of first component here.
Okay, and Jeffrey, just let me know when you're ready to go.
Yeah,
so we talked about this inventory of scripts, and included within the vendor services piece that Jeffrey's going to show you is the ability to go and look at your environment and collect an inventory for you. So this is more of a validation process for those organizations that are running the platform.
Yeah. So to go with that first component, collecting the inventory in the couple different configurations that we run, either in an agent-based format or where that agent is kind of loaded from our services. Both ways we can detect all the scripts that are on the page, and then we bring those back into what we call vendor services here within the payment page manager inside the product, where we categorize those scripts with both their vendor and their service that they're providing. You'll see I've got Google Tag Manager here pulled up, and then for this particular site, I think I just have one script, but any script that falls under this vendor service will appear in this entry. This could include things like dynamic script or other script that might be added as part of the service at a later date. All those would be automatically detected when somebody goes through a checkout session by the agent, and will be performed in every session by the agent in order for it to bring that inventory back here and then go ahead and compare the differences between what's being currently observed and what is recorded within the platform. And then
Jeffrey, this collection of the inventory is part of how the system actually works, right?
Yeah, and we'll see that as we go to tracking things like integrity, alerting. I'm taking a look at some that are authorized here, but you'll see I've got a couple other icons that we'll explore as we get further into the requirements. I'll pass back to you for the next piece.
So then assure the integrity of scripts, right? So again, we're in the payment page manager here, which is a separate piece.
Yep. So what we do when we to provide for assuring the integrity, when we detect a new piece of script or new vendor service on the page, we come over to this needs review status. And so this is the dashboard prompting the admin team saying, hey, I've found something new, something that I don't have any authorizations for, and you should come in here and authorize it. And as part of that authorization flow, when we have this new script, we can take a look and see what it wants to do in the page. And this is a real analysis of that behavior. This is not just a static analysis of the scripts. We do perform a static analysis of the script in order to look for known malware or known bad scripts. However, we also observe that behavior as it behaves in the page while the transaction's occurring, and we can tell you what is going on as far as network transfers, right? I've got Stripe up here, who is a payment provider. They want to send data to stripe.com. They want to load an iframe from stripe.com. They want to get form data that makes up card information. So for this particular vendor, everything checks out fine. When we go through that authorization process, what we're doing when we define that justification, why is this script here? When we allow these behaviors, what we're saying is this is what I'm baselining as integrity. In the background, what we call a behavior contract. And as long as this vendor service and any scripts that make up this vendor service now and in the future behave in the same way, as long as they abide by that behavior contract, then they will not be considered to have their integrity changed. And that provides for detecting from there. And I think that kind of brings us over to the next part. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about that. That was the connection that I was making between requirements like NIS2 that has a disclosure. This is where you get the intelligence to say, this is what I have an unauthorized script, and this is what that script is attempting to do. Transfer data to a domain that we don't know, transfer data to a domain that, or transfer different types of data. So that was one of the exciting pieces with that as well. So the next piece is the real-time monitoring of the scripts. So here, let me jump ahead. So we have a mechanism to ensure that only authorized scripts can execute. So Jeffrey, can you take us through that process of, yes, you've authorized something and now you're going to block it?
Yeah. So here I have another script that's under needs review. And if we go over and take a look at the history, then we can see where previously full story was detected on the page. There was a John F that came through here and provided some baseline authorizations for this vendor service, and it went to authorized. And now it has come back into needs review here today, or a couple of days ago, because its behaviors have changed. The platform's also highlighting for us what those behaviors are that have changed. We can see that now they want to do a network transfer to a different domain that they don't own, or that's not owned by this vendor. They want to load an iframe that's not necessarily from their own domain, and now they want to grab credit card information where it's not relevant, right? This full story is largely around capturing user experience data. It's not really necessary to capture card data to record that experience. So now that we've kind of defined, hey, this probably has some extra content, some extra code in it that we don't want to affect the payment page, what can we do? It's simple enough to come through the payment page manager here in that same authorized vendor flow. And rather than going to allow we'll go over to customize. And what this will give us the option to do is to actually block certain behaviors of this script or set of scripts under this vendor service so that they can't take these actions the next time that they attempt those in a checkout session. Once we save that authorization, we'll see this go to ready to apply rather than authorized because it's asking for us to redeploy that agent. And when I say agent, this is a piece of JavaScript that's merely loaded into the code of the payment page. This is not something that needs to be installed on a web server or distributed by your CDN. We have our own CDN services that will distribute this code and make it available to your end clients so that it runs alongside with all of these other scripts that are running in the payment page. So when I apply those authorizations, it prompts the backend services to redeploy the agent, build those new rules, and make this new agent now aware that when you see full story take these actions, I want you to block them and I want you to report them back to me. So in this way, the script and its other components can stay in the page, right? We haven't ripped them out, but they won't be allowed to do things that could affect the security of the payment card information. We'll get confirmation of that as it occurs.
Jeffrey, we do have a couple of questions coming in.
Sure.
So we have a question from Fred. Does this also track and record JavaScript that run in the client browser or just on the web server itself? Great question.
Yeah, so all of this here will apply directly to what's loading in the client's browser. So this would be the real version, what a real session that a client is going through as the agent detects it. It will monitor whether that script is dynamic, whether that script changes, whether it's tampered with. All of that is visible to the agent. It can see what's happening to that page live. And all of this is going to happen as the client goes through that actual checkout session. So we actually won't take a look at what's going on the web server itself. As I mentioned, it's a JavaScript agent. And so it will be just within the checkout session, just where the rubber meets the road, if you will, where this collection, where this attack will occur in the client's browser. I think, Michael, I will pass back to you and let's talk about 11.6.1.
Sure. There's one other question coming in. We'll just jump in with that before we get started. From Ben Keeley. How could alerts from multiple websites be managed? Multiple, i.e. multiple different scripts running across multiple sites, all protected by Jscrambler.
Yeah, so I've got a drop down here that talks about the different website that's being managed. The Jscrambler shoe store is what we're hooked up to today for our example. And it's the only one I've got inside this instance, but say you had multiple brands or multiple teams, all of those could be fit here. And the drop down would help you and our deployment team to help you set this up to make sure that all of those apply and map directly back to what you have. And then additionally, there's filters that you can filters that you can take a look at via things like URIs and otherwise, so that you can look at, say you have a QA environment or a test environment that's also coming in here, you can separate and segment those out so that you can keep the rest of everything separate.
Got two more questions, and then we'll hold the questions after that for a little bit. One question from Scott. How does Jscrambler handle scripts that frequently change?
Yeah, so that's covered under like dynamic scripts and otherwise. All of those will be detected and cataloged here under where you see this script section. We'll monitor those changes. And as long as there's no change in the behaviors, right, if they're still collecting that information from the same place, they're still sending it to the same domains, right, they're not trying to add iframes or they're just adding the same iframes that they had, then we won't generate an alert that prompts you to interact with that again, right? Their integrity be considered to be the same as it was before. So that gets you out of course, dynamic script, as I've mentioned, but also someone refactoring their code or just making changes that don't really affect the payment card information.
And one more question from Aurelian. What are the main advantages of Jscrambler comparing using CSP and SRI to comply to 6.4.3?
I think the kind of the biggest advantage is going to be that CSP and SRI, CSP alerts, right? SRI cannot. It's a fail close system, and it fails silently when something doesn't match the hash, right? Going back to dynamic script, going back to scripts that change frequently. When that occurs, SRI will stop those from loading, but you may not necessarily be alerted, and you would have to either have some other way of verifying that your checkout session is not harmed or non-functional in some form of timely manner, or have some way to automatically update those hashes, but then you're not going through the review process and understanding what is actually happening with those scripts as you go through those processes.
So Jeffrey, that was the point that I was alluding to earlier with this 12.10.5 piece, is SRI fails silently. You don't know that it's broken. And there will be some challenges to actually create, because now you're going to have to alert. If SRI fails, you're going to have to alert based on this script isn't completing correctly. So there's some participation that organizations will have to have when we start talking about how do we do the incident response piece.
So let's talk 11.6.1, I think, and I think we'll answer some questions there, and then, I think going through 11.6.1 we'll answer some questions, and we'll kind of get to the end here and take care of what's left.
Okay, so and we talked about this, so we can probably see. I mean, I can see it, but then again, I worked with you guys for a fairly long time. The real-time monitoring. So this is real time. This is not once a week. This is not daily. This is every time a script gets loaded. That behavior is going to be checked. And so, Jeffrey, you want to take us through that process and embellish where I've left a couple of things out?
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, every time somebody goes through a checkout session, they're getting a copy of the agent, and the agent's going to take care of everything that it needs to in that session, right? The inventory, monitoring the behaviors, and then send all that back here to the backend services. Here, all the deltas will be checked, and anything that has changed will be brought up for review, certainly within the payment page manager, which is largely focused on the scripts and everything in 6.4.3 around inventory and authorization and keeping a log and history of what's going on. And then also with the HTTP headers, which are also mentioned in 11.6.1, that you should maintain and monitor what values you have for security-focused HTTP headers. For those of you that really have your nose to the ground, you'll know that 4.0.1 was released a couple days ago and has some clarifications that I think, just based on some of the questions I've seen pop up, will be maybe interesting to talk about in the end at the Q&A portion. But certainly, we monitor those headers as well. And when those headers are sent back to the backend systems, we compare those to what we've seen historically. And then if they're different, we'll generate that needs review tag again and say let's take a look at cross-site scripting options. Here, I've just got a value of 1. If that's what I expect for the site, when I go through and review these headers, I can authorize and say, yes, this is a header that I value and a header that I've defined, and I want to save that value. And once that's done, any values and headers that we see that are in this kind of baseline, we won't generate an alert on again, and we'll wait until we see a header value that has changed to a significant degree in order to generate that alert and say, hey, you probably should check out, it looks like your content security policy has been wiped, or otherwise to key you in that something could be going on with the headers there. And then I think we can talk about 12.10.5, which you've kind of tacked on here at the end.
I have, because this is an important piece. So let's talk about how um, you can actually take that monitoring and build that into your incident response plan. How do you get the alert? What do you get in the alert? And
Absolutely.
we've seen some of it, but I just want to go through and I want you to show that the integration is a full integration and provides that ability for organizations to do this um, in a very elegant way.
Absolutely. So any of those alerts that do need to be serviced will be fed in here into the alert section under the PCI DSS module. Those alerts and then also other incidentals and things that we can pull from the page from each session can be brought out via webhook down into a SIM tool, tips, or whatever your favorite flavor is there of those products, and then tied into the incident management process, right? You likely already have an existing process for these things that for most organizations we've found does start at the SIM and then might go over to ServiceNow or Jira or some other management tool that allows you to create tickets and track those incidents. We can come in exactly the same way. Once those alerts are generated, of course, back here in the dashboards where we'll feed you all the detail and where you'll be able to keep up with that log of what are the changes that you've made under each vendor service and each header. We maintain a history. Let me jump down the stripe here of who has come back in to perform these authorizations, what they've authorized and when. We'll integrate also with your single sign-on so that you can have multiple people in here that manage this, that have different roles, whether they're admins, whether they just need to review. Maybe they make authorizations, but they can't change the configuration of the agent, and allows you to integrate to processes that you already have rather than having to develop a bunch of new ones. The last thing that we do that does go really above and beyond the standard are two features, one form shielding, and then the other is iframe hardening. These two features, which one is most relevant kind of depends on your setup. What we see for most people is that they are in some type of configuration where they're loading either iframe or a collection of iframes from a payment processor to collect payment information. What we do is we work with you to come up with a list of, hey, I use Stripe, I use PayPal, I might have, Affirm or some of the other buy now, pay later services on there. These guys are all going to create iframes on the payment page, but no one else should. We'll develop that list, and then the agent, we can pre-program it to tell it, hey, if any of these others, right, Full Story was my example, if they start to try and generate an iframe, or if they start to manipulate the page in a way that could affect the form, with form shielding, we'll automatically know, the agent already knows, hey, I should stop this and then log it. It'll still generate an alert, still for you to come in here and review what's changed and what's happened, but rather than needing to go back and follow a full process and develop a kill chain, you'll have the script already in place. Our agent script will know that it should be blocking that and give you the time to continue and consider what's going on and not put you in an awkward position where it's Black Friday or your relevant busy season and you think you have a card skimmer, right? You're not in a situation where you need to pull the site down or take some other drastic action. There's mitigation already in place. That's a feature that we offer. Again, that's a little bit above and beyond the requirements, but is there in the background and available to those that are using this module. Again, the form shielding technique works very similar in that we're controlling who is allowed to handle and manipulate a form rather than the iframe if you happen to be doing direct post rather than loading payment fields from a payment processor. I think that's what I want to cover here. Other things that I should mention, Michael?
So we did talk about that, and I'm glad you went over the integration with identity management, because that was an important piece. That this is entirely role-based, and that you can actually define those roles and integrate that with your identity management piece. So thank you for that. I think we're ready to move on and address some of the questions that we have
Absolutely.
here.
Okay. So Fabrice asks, how frequently are the pages checked? Periodically, as mentioned in the requirements, 7 days, or continuously, every page loaded by every user on the website? Or is it something else?
Yeah, and so in this case, with the agent there in every session, it's able to check that anytime someone goes through a payment process, right? And that's whether it's their phone, whether it's browser, on a desktop, no matter what the device is, as long as they're looking at it in a browser, which is what the requirements aim at, then we're able to monitor that. That is kind of the irony in that, hey, we're a third-party script monitoring third-party scripts, but it's also the convenience in that we can go anywhere they can because we're built in a similar fashion, and that allows us to keep an eye on them wherever they operate. Now, of course, that does mean that we are vulnerable to similar attacks. What we do to mitigate this is unique to ourselves. We have a separate product that Michael kind of alluded to right in the beginning that's called Code Integrity, that makes sure that the agent, if it's tampered with or if someone targets it for this type of attack, it's capable of resisting that attack, but also generating an alert and saying, hey, I'm being tampered with, someone's trying to modify me or the page in a way that is either beyond scope or outside of the script itself, so that we can keep an eye on things like that and generate those alerts to stay both within compliance and notify you and take some action against that.
We have a question from Sean. Does Jscrambler manage scripts loaded by GTM?
Yes, so you'll see any script that's loaded by any tag manager be broken out into its own vendor script. You'll see that they will be logged in their own vendor service, and you can manage those independently. I know that a lot of people get into situations where, whether it's Google Tag Manager or similar products, aren't necessarily under the direct control of security, compliance, maybe not even web dev. Maybe they belong to marketing or some other department. And so we bring those out separately so that you can control them independently. If you had a problem with something being loaded by Google Tag Manager, otherwise, you wouldn't have to shut off the Tag Manager. You could just shut off the components that it's loading.
And then let's see.
I've got one here that talks about nested iframes, where the outer page is the merchant owned, and then the inner page is the payment service provider. And this kind of carries me back to 401, the new minor version of both these standards. Kind of goes into more specifics around what the responsibility is for the merchant and for the PSP. If you're the merchant and you're using our solution, you are only responsible for, so if you're the merchant and you're using that setup where you have an inner iframe and an outer page, you're only responsible for the pages and iframes that you add content to. So that would be in the situation where it's just the outer page and then the PSP's iframe, you're only responsible for the content in the page, because largely the mechanism is going to be the script in there targeting the iframe, not the content of the iframe, but the iframe itself, and either trying to override it or stop it from loading to load their own, or modify the URI of it before it loads. Your PSP should manage the inside content, but to elaborate there, even if your PSP was using the exact same solution that you are using our solution, and the PSP is, those inventories will not cross-contaminate. They're only going to, your inventory will only contain what's in the page and around the iframe, and your PSP would only contain the inventory of what's within the iframe, as per the standard. Michael, anything to add there? Make sure I've gotten that correct.
No, and I think that's right. And it's always nice to have a new version of the framework drop the same week as your webinar.
Yeah.
But the piece that goes back to that behavior analysis as well, where those behaviors, you're expecting your PSP to behave in a particular way, and you're able to pass that responsibility on to them.
Yeah.
You can say, yes, I'm going to load this script from this particular piece, and you've authorized that, and then their responsibility takes over.
Yeah, and then Scott had a, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
I was going to say, Scott had another question that is clarified by 401, and just reading straight from the standard. It's been clarified, 11.6.1's been clarified a little bit more to say security impacting HTTP headers and the script contents of payment pages as received by the consumer browser. So that's verbatim read there. So you're only responsible for script contents and the HTTP headers that relate to security. Previously, it was like all HTTP headers, and then it was, I think, interactive content was, that's a paraphrase, I believe, not the exact quote, but that's the previous thing there. That's me reading straight from the revision 401.
So with just 3 minutes left, I think if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat or in the questions, and we'll make sure to get back to you after this. But just to wrap up, now we are now at the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, Michael Burke and Jeffrey Cleveland. You will receive an email with the recording of this webinar, some extra resources, including a copy of the assessment white paper from Coalfire, and ways of reaching out to us. If your website accepts, processes, stores, or transmits payment card data, we can help you gain clarity on payment page JavaScript risks in preparation for these requirements. Thank you for spending this hour with Jscrambler. We hope your PCI DSS compliance journey is going to be a smooth one.
And Shannon, if I could just jump in for a second.
Sure.
For those of you that are questioning what the inventory is, Jscrambler provides this free report. So this particular piece is what we were talking about, where QSAs now have the ability to validate inventories using the Jscrambler tool.
Thank you. Any other final thoughts, Jeffrey, before we get shut down?
Oh, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And Jeffrey, thank you.
All right. You will receive the report and the analysis, as mentioned. Thank you so much. We'll hang out for just another minute if you do have more questions.
I'm just going to scroll through here. Let's see. Great. I think we'll sign off here.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you both.
Appreciate it.